Right now, Orbán divides Ukraine. Trump gives Putin what he wants. What's next? Right now, Europe is split, and so is the future of Ukraine. While Zelensky warned that the Trump-Putin meeting in Alaska gave the Kremlin exactly what it wanted, Germany steps up with more weapons and training. Norway and the EU hit harder with oil sanctions, and in a shocking twist, Ukraine and Slovakia talk peace despite opposite views. All of this is happening right now, while Orbán continues to quietly divide Ukraine from within the EU. Welcome to Ukraine Today, I'm Zhyroslava Kolesnikova, and in this episode we break down the betrayal, support and behind-the-scenes battles shaping Ukraine's fate. Let's get into. Ukraine and Slovakia talk peace, opposite views but common goals. Security guarantees EU membership and the future of peace. Ukraine and Slovakia sat down for direct talks. Despite Prime Minister Robert Fico saying 7 times that their countries have completely opposite views, the meeting was called constructive by analysts. Bratislava confirmed it supports all initiatives that could lead to a ceasefire and lasting peace. What did Hill leaders agree on, and what still divides them? Full details in our report.
Security guarantees for Ukraine, EU membership and the meeting between the President of Ukraine and the Prime Minister of Slovakia are described by analysts as a constructive dialogue. And although Robert Fico repeated 7 times during the briefing that Slovakia and Ukraine, I quote, have diametrically opposed views on many issues, he emphasized, Bratislava supports all initiatives leading to a ceasefire and peace.
We are counting on support for Ukraine's peace efforts. Robert assured that Slovakia will work together with us and other partners for the sake of peace. We discussed the issue of security guarantees for Ukraine, and it is good that Slovakia is ready to define its position on this matter and is open to dialogue with us.
The meeting in Uzhhorod took place against the backdrop of heightened tensions between Kyiv and Bratislava following recent Ukrainian drone attacks on the Druzhba oil pipeline in the Bryansk region and after Fico's talks with Putin in China. At the meeting with the Russian dictator, the Prime Minister of Slovakia condemned the Ukrainian strikes on oil processing facilities in Russia and said that he would like to continue cooperation with Russia in the supply of oil and gas. Kyiv is responding to the aggressor country's strikes on Ukrainian energy facilities and will continue to respond, the President of Ukraine stated directly, as Volodymyr Zelensky outlined both this and Kyiv's position on energy supplies.
We are ready to supply gas. We are ready to supply gas and oil to Slovakia only on the condition that these are not Russian energy resources. That's final.
After talks with the President of Ukraine, the Prime Minister of Slovakia assured Bratislava supports Kyiv on its path to EU membership.
I want to wish you peace and, above all, a promising European future. EU membership involves a complex process that must be completed. I have offered to share all the experience that the Slovak government has.
While Slovakia is ready to share its experience with European integration, Hungary is not changing its position. Budapest is against Ukraine joining the EU, Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó stated.
We don't care what Moscow thinks about Ukraine's EU membership. We're interested in what Hungarians think. They don't want Ukrainians to destroy our farmers, our labor market and our security. Péter Szijjártó, Hungarian Minister of Foreign Affairs, on Facebook.
Hungary's position on Ukraine's accession to the European Union is already reaching the level of the Kremlin's in terms of inadequacy, according to Ukrainian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Georgy Tykhy.
Because there are no real obstacles to deny Ukraine the opening of accession talks with the EU. We expect the unblocking of Ukraine's path to the EU, a path Ukraine has earned, for which it has fulfilled all the necessary conditions, and for which there are no justified obstacles. Frankly, you couldn't say it better than the president. If even Putin says he's not against Ukraine joining the EU, then really, Orbán should think about why he's against Ukraine's accession to the EU if even his friend, so to speak, isn't opposed.
Ukraine's accession to the EU does not pose a threat to Hungary. On the contrary, it serves its national interests, says Ukraine's Deputy Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha.
Ukraine's accession to the EU does not threaten Hungarian farmers who have never once blocked the Ukrainian-Hungarian border and who, this year, are actively buying Ukrainian corn. Our accession to the EU also does not threaten the Hungarian labor market, since before the Russian invasion, your government was actively inviting Ukrainians to work in Hungary to make up for the shortage of skilled labor. The main Hungarian community of Zakarpattia supports Ukraine's accession to the EU, as its leaders have repeatedly stated publicly. The protection of their interests is enshrined in the Constitution of Hungary, Andrei Sibiha, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, on the social network X.
The head of Ukraine's foreign ministry invited his Hungarian counterpart Peter Szijjártó to meet for a constructive dialogue in the name of peace and security. Yulia Granovska for Freedom TV channel.
Norway and EU thicken oil. Sanctions pressure on Russia grows. Sanctions are getting stronger. Norway has lowered the peace cap of Russian oil, adding to the pressure from the EU's new fuel restrictions that took effect on September 3rd. Brussels and Washington now plan to coordinate closely to hit Moscow even harder. The goal, a complete phase-out of Russian energy in Europe, and the US fully supports it. What tools will be used next to cut off the Kremlin's war funding? Full analysis in our report.
On September 8th, a team of European officials will meet with their American counterparts to discuss sanctions pressure on Russia, reports the Associated Press, citing sources. According to the agency, on September 5th, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen discussed new restrictions with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and prior to that, with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. In addition, EU Energy Commissioner Dan Jurgensen stated that he will meet with U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright next week. The topic of the talks will be sanctions against the energy sector of the aggressor country. The European Union should completely stop purchasing Russian energy resources, the European Commissioner believes, and it should not resume supplies even after the end of Russia's war against Ukraine. He emphasized that Washington also supports the EU in fully halting imports of Russian oil and gas.
I am looking forward to exchanging views at this meeting. I have a very good relationship with Minister Wright, and I am confident that we will be able to plan our next steps. Putin has not only used energy as a weapon against us and blackmailed EU states, but we are also indirectly helping to finance Putin's war, and this must stop. A positive outcome would be if President Trump agrees to this, because that is certainly our main goal.
Brussels is already working on the 19th package of sanctions against Russia, announced the President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, at a meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. On September 3rd, a new price cap for Russian oil came into effect at $47.50 per barrel. Next in line is the introduction of a ban on the purchase of secondary products made from the aggressor country's oil.
We are working with the United States and other partners to strengthen our pressure through direct and secondary sanctions. More economic measures are needed to force Russia to stop this war, to stop killing people, to end this war in Ukraine. Work on a significant new sanctions package is now beginning in Brussels, and our dedicated European team is currently heading to Washington to collaborate closely with our American friends and allies.
Sanctions against Russian energy exports will only be truly effective if the United States joins the European restrictions, analysts believe.
If you carefully take into account the significant fact that the current actual market price of Urals crude oil is hovering around $62 to $63, and that the Russian Federation consistently gives India a substantial $5 discount off the prevailing Urals price, then the precise actual price at which Russia is currently selling this valuable oil to India is, in fact, considerably lower than the established price cap that is strictly enforced by the Americans. The United States joining this restriction would significantly impact the revenues of the Russian Federation.
The US has already imposed 50% tariffs on Indian goods, but New Delhi has stated that it does not intend to reduce its imports of fuel from Russia. According to experts, the next step Washington might take could be imposing restrictions on Indian banks involved in purchasing Russian oil.
The United States can write off billions of dollars from major Indian banks in a single day. In other words, they can impose sanctions and immediately enforce them. With companies, it's much more difficult. But with banks, it's very easy. Why? Because India conducts transactions in dollars and euros, and a large bank usually keeps several billion dollars in its correspondent accounts. It's very easy to punish banks.
Another important aspect of the West's sanctions policy is the restrictions on Russia's shadow fleet. According to the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, in July 2025, 58% of Moscow's crude oil was transported on tankers flying the flags of third countries. As part of the 18th package of restrictions, the EU expanded the list of sanctioned vessels by 105 tankers. In total, about 400 ships of the aggressor country's shadow fleet are now under the restrictions of the European Union countries. Andriy Dimitrenko for Freedom TV channel.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Germany to boost support for Ukraine, more weapons and training coming. Germany is stepping up. Government spokesman Stefan Cornelius confirmed that Berlin is ready to increase funding and training for Ukraine's defense forces. According to Der Spiegel, the new package will also include more air defense systems, modern weapons and armored vehicles for battlefield. Chancellor Friedrich Merz said it clearly, a strong army is the best guarantee of Ukraine's security. What exactly is in Germany's new support plan and how soon will it arrive? Full details in our report.
According to Germany's plan, Ukraine should become a porcupine, powerful and dangerous for the enemy. According to Der Spiegel, this plan was presented by the German Chancellor at the summit of the Coalition of Willing Countries in Paris. The plan involves large-scale deliveries of new weapon systems, training of Ukrainian military personnel, and close integration of Ukraine's defense industry with European partners.
The most important security guarantee we can provide at this moment is sufficient support for the Ukrainian army in its efforts to defend the country. Friedrich Merz, Federal Chancellor of Germany, from a Der Spiegel publication.
Berlin proposes to increase Ukraine's air defense capabilities by 20% annually, as well as to step up cooperation in the development of Ukrainian-made cruise missiles.
Ukraine must become a potentially dangerous, in any case combat-ready porcupine, capable of withstanding any attack. There are plans to improve Ukraine's offensive air capabilities. This refers to long-range, high-precision weapons such as cruise missiles, which are produced in Ukraine with financial and technological support. From a Der Spiegel publication.
The decision on further military commitments, primarily regarding the deployment of troops to Ukraine as part of multinational forces, will be made by Berlin only after the general conditions have been determined, explained federal government representative Stefan Cornelius. This also concerns the participation of the United States in providing security guarantees for Ukraine and the outcomes of the negotiation process.
First of all, it is necessary to continue working on holding a summit with the participation of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, at which an agreement on a ceasefire should be reached. If the Russian side continues to stall, Europe will increase sanctions pressure to boost the chances for a diplomatic resolution. Stefan Cornelius, representative of the German federal government, in a comment to Agence France Presse.
Europe still cannot do without US support, admitted German Chancellor Friedrich Merz.
I noticed that in Europe we are returning to a new sense of unity, and this largely depends on the commitment of the German federal government. This is not an overestimation of our capabilities. Rather, it is the role that is expected of us. Of course, I am also aware of the limited capabilities available to Europeans, including the European part of NATO. If we look at the war in Ukraine right now, we Europeans are not able, and this worries me, to exert enough pressure on Putin to put an end to this war. We are dependent on the help of the Americans.
The German federal government does not rule out participation in multinational forces, but a prerequisite for this must be a ceasefire or a peace agreement. Discussing this publicly at this stage is absolutely inappropriate, emphasized German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius. And according to Friedrich Merz, after a ceasefire agreement is reached, much can be done.
The only path to an acceptable peace is to strengthen Ukraine as much as possible. We need to create a situation in which Putin will fear losing the war. I believe that Chancellor Merz is fundamentally different from his predecessor in this regard. He can explain to the public why it is in our interest for Ukraine to win this war. Ralph Fuchs, German political scientist, in an interview with Deutsche Welle.
An important component of security guarantees for Kyiv, according to Berlin's vision, is Ukraine's European integration, as well as financial and economic assistance to the country. Kristina Dombrovskaya for Freedom TV channel.
Trump-Putin meeting gave Kremlin what it wanted, Zelensky warns. President Zelensky says it loud and clear. Putin got what he wanted from his meeting with Trump in Alaska. In an interview with ABC News, Zelensky stressed that only stronger pressure from the US and Europe can stop the war. But will Washington really confront the Kremlin? What does Trump say now, and is Russia ready for the consequences?
US President Donald Trump announced that in the coming days he will speak with Russian dictator Vladimir Putin and confirmed his readiness to move to the second phase of sanctions against Moscow. He answered affirmatively, yes. The statement from the American president came after the largest airstrike on Ukraine since the start of the war, which killed 3 people and for the first time damaged the cabinet of ministers building in central Kyiv. By the way, in response to 2 questions, Trump repeated 4 times that the issue would be resolved, 5 times that he was dissatisfied with the situation, and once again stated that he had already stopped 7 wars. In addition, the head of the White House said that he expected to meet with European leaders at the beginning of the week. According to Trump, their visit will be dedicated to seeking ways to end the war in Ukraine, although specific names have not yet been mentioned. According to information from the reputable publication Bloomberg, the EU delegation is heading to Washington specifically for negotiations on new sanctions against Russia. The European Union countries are planning to introduce new restrictions that will affect Russian banks, the oil sector, payment systems, and cryptocurrency exchanges. This will be the 19th package of EU sanctions since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. At the same time, President Volodymyr Zelensky shared his vision of what victory for Ukraine in the war with Russia would look like. In an interview with the American TV channel ABC News, the head of state called on allies not to limit themselves to partial measures and to continue putting pressure on Moscow, because Putin's goal is to fully occupy Ukraine. And in my opinion, Ukraine's victory will be its survival.
As long as he hasn't occupied us, we are winning. And that's what I believe, because we have our own country, and of course he understands this clearly. He of course wants to fully occupy us. For him, that would be victory. And as long as he can't do that, victory is on our side. The war is painful because there are so many losses. That's why survival is a victory for us, because we preserve our identity, our country, our independence.
Speaking about a possible meeting with Putin, Zelensky stated that the Russian president proposed conditions for the meeting that he cannot accept, and that Putin is playing games and threatening the United States.
I said, listen very carefully, Mr. President. I am absolutely ready for any and all meetings, but certainly not here in Russia. Any meeting, whether bilateral or trilateral, would be great if you are there.
Meanwhile, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent stated on NBC that Washington has the capability to completely destroy the Russian economy. But for that, the support of Europe is needed. And while the West is once again hesitating for a long time to support our country, Rovtry Journal reports that Ukraine will be able to hold the defense for another 2 to 3 years. Major offensives in the spring and summer have resulted in only minor territorial gains. Moscow's strategy is to exhaust Ukraine's forces to the point of capitulation, rather than to seize territory. But for now, our country is managing to hold back the enemy's onslaught.
And just recently, footage like this appeared online, showing the situation in Yenakiv and Debaltsev, which are more than 50 kilometers from the front line. Meanwhile, in various channels, people are anxiously discussing the new Ukrainian drones that are striking Russian military equipment deep behind enemy lines with precision.
That's all for today on Ukraine Today. If you want to keep up with what's really happening, like, comment and subscribe to stay with us. And don't just watch, become a sponsor and join our community. Your support helps us fight disinformation and defend Ukraine's voice on the global stage. Stay strong, stay informed and stay with Ukraine.